You're listening to a DM podcast.
Welcome to Betoota Talks. You're with your host Clancy and Errol and Errol Parker, editors of the Betoota Advocate. And today's guest is one that we have been chasing for an interview for nearly a decade. But today he's finally agreed to speak with us, and we're both excited and grateful for him to take the time. Ladies and gentlemen, in the studio today, we are blessed to be joined by number 28, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Thank you for joining us.
Clancy and Errol, thank you for having me.
First of all, I want to say you're an incredible nick. You're in great nick. What are you doing nowadays?
Look, I still get on the bike quite a lot. I occasionally go on to the longer and longer longboard and drop in on my former constituents near Queenscliff. And if I'm in a hotel and it has a half decent gym, I'll go to the gym. So that's what I do to try to start most days.
You're not into the class stuff?
Class stuff? What's that?
You know, fitness classes, boot camps?
No. Occasionally, someone at the gym might take me under his wing and say, you should be doing it this way, not that way. But no, I don't do the boot camps.
No. As a cyclist, though, what's your view of like a spin class?
I've done one and it was much harder than I thought it would be. But I mostly go riding with a group of people who I've known for a long time. They were people I was at school and uni and played rugby with, and so it's like a mobile men's shed.
Yep.
The ride is what you do to justify the coffee afterwards, and then of course you can go out and eat and drink to your heart's content for the rest of the day, and not feel guilty. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a meditative thing too. It's spin class is great, but you've got non-stop Kylie Minogue playing.
Yeah.
No, I would have thought it'd be a bit hard to pedal hard over the Roseville Bridge than it would be in an air-conditioned room with some music.
You'd be surprised. As I said, my one time I went to a spin class at one of those fancy gyms in Mossman, and it was pretty hard work. It really was. Pedalling over Roseville Bridge is something I try to avoid these days because the traffic is not very friendly particularly to solitary cyclists.
Now, let's quickly talk about footy. You said you played rugby there.
Yeah.
How good were you? Because there were rumours that you nearly got a pat on the bum from Alan Jones when he was coaching at Marlins.
It would have been an encouragement, pat on the bum,
pat on the shoulder,
as opposed to where I'm picking you a pat on the bum.
It was tap on the shoulder.
Look, I played just under 50 first grade games for Sydney University. I think I played all up about 150 grade games for Sydney University from 1976 until I went off to England as a student in 1980. What year was it? 1980. I played 5 seasons with uni. Then when I came back, I played another 3 seasons with uni. Then I went down to Canberra to be a staffer for John Hewson. I had a couple of seasons playing lower grades for Tuggeranong. So I had a pretty lengthy rugby life.
Yeah. And boxing. Was that something you picked up in the lead up to going over to Oxford, or was that something you did as a boy?
Well, Clancy, I was put into first grade. I was sort of pitchforked into first grade in my second year at uni when most people are playing Colts. And so the guys I was packing down against were older and slaggier than me.
Beard rash.
And in those days, there was a lot of most games had at least one brawl essentially. Yeah. And I thought it's going to be important not to be unable to compete properly. You know, you've got to be able to play the man and not the ball, so to speak. So me and a couple of other young forwards that were perhaps a little over-promoted, we went to boxing class at the end of that season over the summer. I then really thought little about boxing, but when I got to Oxford, one of my best mates, funnily enough, he was an American Jesuit scholastic, one of the most amazing and impressive people I've ever met in my life. He was in the boxing club. I guess you'd say he was the ultimate muscular Christian. Yeah. And he said to me one night, at the beginning of term. We were having a couple of drinks to say, isn't it good to be back? He said, look, they're light on for people in the heavier divisions. Why don't you come down and try out? And first of all, I said no. A couple of drinks later, I said, what the hell? Let's give it a go. So that's how I became a boxer. I had 2 seasons of boxing at Oxford, only had 4 fights, won all of them. And again, it was part of the wonderful life I had as a student over there in England.
Now, that wasn't the first time you'd been to England.
No, I was actually born there, Clancy.
Yes, I want to talk about that. You're a 10-pound pom.
Yep.
By all metrics. You know, you came out in that assisted migration passage. Your family arrived on the SS Oronsay, a very sturdy vessel.
Well, I have no memories because I think I was 2.5 or something at the time. So I really can't tell you anything about the vessel. I think it might have been either the Oronsay's final voyage or close to the final voyage. It was one of those great P&O ships which, in those days at least, ran regular services between Britain and Australia, and I suppose in these times are kind of reduced to running cruises and things.
Well, those ships brought us a lot of great Australians, you know what I mean? We got the Bee Gees, we got the Skyhooks.
Julia Gillard, another migrant from Britain.
Yep, Jimmy Barnes.
Jimmy Barnes, correct.
AC/DC.
Yep, Ian Roberts.
A lot of rugby league players, yeah.
Do you think that your interest in and service to Australia kind of stems from growing up as a new arrival? Were you that aware of it?
No, because particularly as a new arrival whose parents had been in Australia, then gone to England for work and for study, and then had come back, I never thought of myself as a POM. I've always been a bit of an Anglophile. I love the institutions that we've inherited from Britain. I love the broadly Anglo-Celtic culture that we have in this country. But no, I never thought of myself as a POM in any way. And in fact, when I became the executive director of Australians for Constitutional Monarchy, I swiftly dispensed with my British passport because I didn't want people to think that I was supporting the Crown and the Constitution because I was more of a POM than an Aussie. In terms of public service, I was lucky enough to go to a Jesuit school. First of all, St. Aloysius College, then I went to St. Ignatius. In those days, and I believe still, the Jesuits had this motto that they were very big on: as far as you can, try to be a man for others. Now, obviously you can be a man for others in all sorts of ways, by being a good husband, by being a good father, by being a good neighbour, by being a good workmate. But with the Jesuits, there was, I think, the hope, and maybe with some of us the expectation, that we would take on some kind of leadership role. And I was very happy, I guess, to dream big dreams even then.
But there was the priesthood was something you were looking at?
I did. I had 3 years when I came back from Oxford. I went to St. Patrick's Seminary at Manly, as it then was. I had 2 fairly difficult years there. The rector of the seminary decided that I needed to be taken down a peg or 2, so he sent me out as a pastoral student to Emu Plains in Western Sydney. That was actually a great year because I was under the tutelage of a wonderfully down-to-earth parish priest, Kevin Hannon, and he and I had a great time. But at the end of that year, I was thinking, I'm afraid I'm a square peg in a round hole. And so that was the end of it.
What kind of Catholic are you, I need to ask, because you know, your family were, you don't view yourself as a POM and you grew up in Australia and you don't really remember migrating, but your family were post-war Londoners who were Catholic. So does that mean you're Irish originally or they defied Henry VIII and held strong?
No, I mean, Mum was your typical Sydney girl of that era who went to England for the London experience, worked in the NHS. Dad was a POM who'd come to Australia during the war, joined the Australian Air Force, became a dentist, went to England as you had to in those days to do further professional studies. They were part of the Aussie scene, the Earls Court scene, I guess.
Yeah. And Kangaroo
that Barry Humphries kind of popularised, the Barry Mackenzie kind of thing. And they met there, they married, they had me and my sister. Then they came back to Australia. So look, we weren't really POMs. Dad was a convert to Catholicism.
Right.
He took his Catholicism very seriously. Mum became a Catholic when she married Dad, and a very good woman, Mum, but she wasn't a particularly devout person. But Dad was always a serious Catholic.
No, I always thought though. I just wanted to track back to when you had to renounce your Britishness for the purposes of running the Anti-Monarchist League.
The Anti-Republican League.
The
Pro-Monarchy League, yeah.
I thought it was because you were such a student of our political system that you knew that you couldn't be two nationalities and sit in Parliament. Because I get this impression that you were always kind of directing yourself into politics.
I think I probably always had an interest in it.
Yeah.
When I was a youngster, my mum would often bring home for me to read what was relatively popular in the 1960s, the Ladybird historical series of books. And I can't remember all of the titles that Mum brought home, but it was things like Julius Caesar, Alfred the Great, Richard the Lionheart, Napoleon, Wellington, Nelson, all these big figures of history. So I guess I was fascinated as a relative youngster by these people who'd made a difference, changed the world. And then, of course, when I got to university, I came under the spell of the late, great B.A. Santa Maria, and he ran these democratic clubs on campus, which were effectively the old DLP clubs that had kind of segued into democratic clubs. And so I got very involved in student politics. I became president of the student council at Sydney University. I was on the university senate as a student for a year. So I guess by the time I got to Oxford, I thought to myself, well, if the priesthood thing works, great. Yeah. But if not, let's try to be influential. At Sydney University, I started writing for, first of all, Honi Soit, when Honi Soit wouldn't publish me because I was too right-wing. I started writing for the Sydney Morning Herald, for the Bulletin, for the Australian. I'd written a bit for papers back home while I was at Oxford. When I did go to the seminary, my first part-time job to get a bit of pocket money was actually with the Catholic Weekly, until the Archbishop decided that he didn't like being lectured to in his own newspaper by one of his seminarians. So I had to stop.
Yeah.
So I went back to the Bulletin and wrote there during the seminary vacations. So I sort of emerged from the seminary as a journalist. Did that for a few years. Then after the 1990 election, I happened to have lunch one day with John Howard, who I'd become friendly with. John mentioned that there was a job going as John Hewson, the then opposition leader's press secretary. Within a day, I'd had a phone call saying, come down to meet John Hewson. And a few hours later, I was engaged as his press secretary, which I did for 3 years before then going off to run Australians for Constitutional Monarchy for about a year. Now, I suspect, Errol, because I think it was Bob Woods, the member for Lowe, subsequently a senator, who I think might have had a problem. There was a case back in the, I think, late 80s where there was an issue over the issue of double passports and things. And I think at the time the argument was that someone who had a British passport was not caught by that section, but I guess the doctrine of the divisible crown meant that the High Court felt otherwise. So I was certainly aware dimly by that stage in my life that having a British passport was a problem. But I forsook my British passport wholly and solely because I really didn't want that to become an issue in my advocacy for the Crown, because the point I made then, the point I make to this very day, we've sort of Australianised the Crown.
Yeah.
I mean, in Britain, the Crown is King Charles, who lives in Buckingham Palace and is surrounded by all of the, I suppose, trappings of regal office. In Australia, effectively, the Crown is worn by our Governor-General. These days, always a distinguished Australian, but I think different and better because that person represents the Crown as opposed to being a president representing himself, a party, or this vague concept of the people. I think we get a better class of person as our Governor-General than we would if we had a president, either one elected by the Parliament or by the people.
If our Governor-General was elected by the people, who do you think would be a more likely candidate? Like a sportsman or
Pat Cummins, wouldn't it?
A minor celebrity? Or
well, I think we could easily get that kind of thing. And look, I've got nothing against sportsmen or minor celebrities for that matter, but I think we need in that job, because not only is it the job of the Governor-General to go to civic events and sort of bestow kindness and
they do actually have a function, don't they?
There's an important constitutional role. They are, if you like, the proofreader of last resort of legislation and government instruments. And on those rare occasions when there is a kind of a parliamentary deadlock, as there was in 1975, the Governor-General is the constitutional umpire. And you want someone who has judgment, someone who has statecraft. And that's why former generals, former judges, former very senior business people are normally the best people for that role.
I want to ask just quickly on the monarchy thing. You were a big, proud pro-monarchist. You campaigned heavily against the Republic referendum. I want to talk about that, and I'm sure this all comes up in the book. By the way, for the listeners who aren't aware, Australia, A History by Tony Abbott. We're going to discuss that a bit later in this interview. I want to talk about this juxtaposition of you as a proud Catholic and staunch monarchist.
Yeah.
At that age, 20s and 30s, you're kind of a war in a body at that point. There's, because there are a lot of proud Catholics that were trying to bomb a lot of proud royals at that time in your life.
Yeah, but I don't think it was their Catholicism that was driving the IRA. I think it was their Irish
label.
Nationalism. Yeah. Now, look, the great thing about the Crown in Australia is that we've worn it lightly. The connection has never caused us a problem. I mean, unlike the American colonies where the settlers thought that the Crown was attempting to coerce them, if you read the book, Britain was very keen not to repeat in Australia the mistakes of the earlier century in the United States. Britain was very keen to give us democratic self-government and certainly measures of self-government before there was any really serious demand for it. I mean, once the demand was there, the government in London very, very happily met it.
All right, let's talk about the book. Which one of Peter Fitzsimon's books did you read before you realised, fuck, I can do better than this?
Well, I've dipped into many of Peter's books. He's absolutely prolific. For me, the book that I read extremely thoroughly of Peter's, one of his very first, if not his first, was his biography of Kim Beazley. A great book, a very fine piece of political biography, where I think Fitzy got to the heart of Kim Beazley, and I think it's a fair-minded but not uncritical portrait of someone who I say in the book is probably the most outstanding Labor person of recent times, never to have been Prime Minister. And Kim Beazley, I'm pleased to say, does write an encouraging note, which is published at the start of the book.
So does Fitzsimons, actually. I read his one. He didn't want to, but he gave you one.
No, but you see, Fitzy and I have known each other for a long time. We played rugby together at Sydney University. Fitzy was a much better footballer than I was, but even though we've never agreed on anything, except that Sydney University maybe deserved to win a few games that we didn't, apart from that, we've been pretty good mates all along.
I want to talk about the themes in this book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we said before, you've had a very interesting life. You're not just, you know, this kind of white bread North Shore guy. Your family comes from, you know, different parts of the world, and you could argue that you had a migrant experience in this country. You could argue
you've been over the bridge a few times.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. We talk nowadays, particularly in politics, and this is where the Liberal Party are really slipping, and you might even agree that faith-based communities are being forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So you're very familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as someone who nearly joined the priesthood. What spurred you to write this, and what are the themes you explore in, you know, Tony Abbott's Australia, a History?
Well, Clancy, I think that we've got a history to be proud of, and I was trying to figure out what I could do with my post-prime ministerial life once I left the parliament. And look, most senior politicians write memoirs. Now, good on them. There's a lot to be said for that, but I just decided that the story of us would be a more interesting topic than the story of me. I had written 3 lengthy essays about the Abbott government, which I'd published in Quadrant, and I figured I'd said enough about the Abbott government. I'd leave the Abbott government essentially to the professional historians or the political commentators, and I'd do something different. Now, maybe one day I might turn to a book of political anecdotes or something like that, but for the moment...
We need an LBJ trilogy. That's what we need.
I don't know that we do, frankly.
Do we need 800 long pages like Kevin Rudd gave us?
Well, Kevin gave me a copy of his latest book, which I'm pleased is not about Kevin. It's about Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, and I am looking forward to browsing through that over Christmas. But look, ours is a great story. I mean, when you think, Errol, back in 1788, 1,500 bedraggled convicts and Marines dumped halfway around the world and more or less told, make a go of this. Not exactly propitious beginning, and yet within 100 years, the colonies here had the world's highest standard of living. In the 1850s, we had universal male suffrage here, some 60 years before it happened in Britain. In the 1890s in South Australia, both sexes and all races could both vote and, at least in theory, run for office. So we were a democratic pioneer. And yes, as we need to acknowledge, at times it was very tough for the first Australians. And I spent a lot of time on the Myall Creek massacre, for instance, in the book.
Old Plunkett, he was the judge there.
Well, exactly right. Plunkett is an Australian, well, he was an Irish Catholic who came to Australia, became the first Attorney General in New South Wales, and someone who we should know better because but for Plunkett, the Myall Creek murderers would have got away with it. Mm-hmm. He was determined to bring them to justice, and when the first jury refused to convict, he brought fresh charges. The judge at the second trial said that this was an atrocity, crying out to heaven for justice, and the second jury did convict, and 7 white men were hanged back in 1838 for the murder of black people. And, okay, it was a dreadful, dreadful thing that happened, but there was a sequel, and the sequel showed that there was a measure of justice. Now, many others escaped justice who deserved punishment, including in another case that I talk about in the book, a squatter up in the Clarence called Coots, who almost certainly was responsible for the poisoning of flour, which killed about 24 Aboriginal people. Again, Plunkett was determined to bring the alleged perpetrator to trial. Unfortunately, the case collapsed because the only eyewitnesses were Aboriginal people, and in those days, not being Christians, therefore not being able to swear on the Bible, Aboriginal people were thought to be incapable of giving testimony in court. Now, Plunkett, to his credit, tried to change the law, but his proposal was knocked back 10-9 in the Legislative Council. So it was another decade or so before courts in New South Wales were able to accept Aboriginal testimony. But
have you ever been out to Inverell? Have you ever? They do a dawn service every year for this particular massacre, and they have descendants of both sides.
Well,
and it's an interesting feeling. It is that reconciliation vibe that you talk about and you never see.
Very good point, Clancy. Now, I had not previously been to the site of the Mile Creek Massacre, but as part of the Sky doco, which was made basically as a kind of an accompaniment to the book, we did go out to Mile Creek and talked to some of the Indigenous survivors of the massacre, and it was very powerful. Very, very powerful. And I've got to say that we've got to accept that there's good and bad in our past, but I think the important thing is to learn from it and to try to be better in the future, to learn from the past, not to be a prisoner of the past. I think that's the important thing.
There's another key theme in this book about using patriotism as sort of glue to hold society together. 25 years ago, we had the Olympics in Sydney. We had 110,000 people pack in to watch the Bledisloe Cup that year. And then we won the Rugby World Cup the year before, the Cricket World Cup. It seemed that patriotism
was a golden year.
Was in. It seemed that back then it was cool to be on Team Australia. That really did seem like, for many people, a real cultural high watermark. And since then, the waters have receded. Why do you think that's happened?
That's a very good point. And my original plan was to close the book at the Sydney Olympics, because you're right, it was a high watermark in our national life. It was a bit of a golden age, certainly in terms of us feeling good about Australia.
Sydney Uni win that year?
Look, I can't remember. We broke the drought. We won a first division, first grade premiership in 1972. Then we didn't win a first division premiership in any grade until 1999, when I think second grade won a premiership, except for 1986, when I was the captain coach of fourth grade and we won a first division premiership that year. But to get back to the question, Errol.
Like, what's happened to make you know, kind of wearing, like, it almost seems like now it's not cool for the average punter to really care about our national identity.
Do you think the flag got abused a bit?
Yes and no. I mean, I like to see people wearing the flag. I suppose if you're at a sort of a kind of a boozy barbecue on Australia Day and you put the flag around your shoulders and you kind of become a bit of a mugler, that's not optimal. But hey, I mean, it's just one of those things. Look, I think that one of the great things about post-war migration, if I may say so, which was a wonderful success. I mean, it had its little hiccups, but it was a wonderful success overall. The new Australians, as we were accustomed to call them in the 50s and 60s, were expected first to integrate and then to assimilate. From the 70s and 80s on, we started to talk about multiculturalism. Now, if all multiculturalism means is that newcomers to Australia become Australian without too much pressure on them, I think that's fine. But if multiculturalism means that you've got a whole cadre of ethnic, in inverted commas, leaders who are encouraged to maintain, if you like, separate ethnic identities within Australia, I think that is a little problematic.
What do you say to not so much Team Australia. I'm talking about our institutions now, because it's worth reaching out, and the Labor Party's learnt that. They've reached out, and they've kind of cast a wide net, and they've managed to pull in seats that no one ever thought they were ever going to get. Now, you look at the Indian Australian community, you look at the Chinese Australian community, and you look at their relationship with both parties, and it becomes clear that there's a want to join the system, to join what we're talking about here.
Correct.
And there is a feeling that they're being iced out of the Liberals. What do you say to that when you see, we talked about before, Bradfield, safest blue ribbon seat in the history of Australia, and there was a mix-up there with the young Chinese kid wanted to run. Yeah. They accused him of being a spy for the CCP, and then he ran as an independent, and a till got up. There is for the people who want to buy into the system, what do you say to the system that won't let them in?
Well, you make a good point. One of the wonderful things that Philip Ruddock did for the Liberal Party when he was Minister for Immigration and subsequently in the Howard government was he made a huge point of going out and embracing migrant communities. I mean, I think Philip must have gone to 5 or 6 migrant events every Friday and Saturday night. He was absolutely indefatigable.
Is he the one that got the Armenians on side?
Well,
you got plenty of them coming through.
Well, I'm not sure whether it was Philip that did it, but I've got to say that they're terrific people, the Armenians, and they're wonderful Australians. But I think we do need to reach out to all of the Australians of today, of migrant backgrounds. But if I look at the candidates we had in Sydney at the recent election, now unfortunately a lot of good people didn't get elected, but we had a Chinese Australian candidate in Bennelong, we had a Chinese Australian candidate in Reid, we had an Indian Australian candidate, I can't remember the seat, but it's another one of the seats out in Western Sydney.
In Chisholm in the last Parliament, Gladys Liu.
Gladys Liu, yep. She was briefly she had one term in the Parliament.
1 term.
If you go back in time, the first Chinese-born member of an Australian Parliament was actually Helen Sham Ho in New South Wales. The first Chinese-born member of the federal Parliament was Senator Bin Shen, a Liberal from Victoria. First Aboriginal person in the federal Parliament, of course, was Neville Bonner, a Liberal from Queensland. The first Aboriginal member of an Australian Parliament was actually a National Party member in Queensland back in the late 1960s. So historically, we've got a very good record, but we need to do more. You're right about that.
Yeah.
Well, there are lots of things that I want to cover, but we don't have too much time left. But there's one thing I wanted to talk to you about that, just on what the Liberal Party was. We've seen in the most recent election that the Liberal Party has really sunk to some depths that people didn't think it was able to get to in terms of its representation in Parliament. And most of the damage has been done through these former blue ribbon seats going to this newfangled teal movement. What is the path back for the Liberals into government? Is it through winning those teal seats back, or is it through the bush? Is it through a new coalition with One Nation?
Well, Errol, I think the way back is to be a strong and clear alternative to what is, in my view, a deeply underwhelming government. I certainly don't think we're going to win back the so-called teal seats by out-tealing the teals. I think the way to win them back is to have a whole lot of credible policies to appeal to their sense of what's right for Australia. And what is right for Australia? We need a strong economy. We need to have strong national security. And yes, we've got to look after the environment. But, one of the many things that I don't like about the emissions obsession is that practical environmentalism, I think, has been neglected over the last couple of decades. You might remember, Errol, that one of the things I did as part of the Howard government was something called the Green Corps, which was groups of young people doing environmental traineeships, practical things like getting rid of noxious weeds and feral animals, building tracks in national parks, doing land care, waterway care, that kind of thing. And I expanded that into something called the Green Army when I was Prime Minister. Unfortunately, it was one of the first things that my successor dumped, and because he, of course, was a bit of an emissions man.
A bit of teal about him.
Yeah, maybe so.
It was the emissions trading.
Yeah, that's you've got the accent right. That's right. But anyway,
trade and make money.
Well, there was a bit of arbitrage possibility in all this. I mean, merchant bankers could get involved in that kind of stuff, whereas the Green Army was more for people who would be to get their hands dirty and roll their sleeves up. Anyway, so look, I am all in favour of practical environmentalism. I hate to see remnant bush bulldozed. I hate to be out there walking in the bush and see lantana and bamboo.
Yeah.
I don't like the fact that we've still got lots of carp in our western rivers and so on. I mean, to me, this is the important environmental challenge, not fretting over whether we might have 400 parts or 500 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Yeah. I want to ask, as someone who spent a lot of time in the bush, as you said, sounding a lot like Uncle Tony there right now. You're talking about looking after country, sounding like the Indigenous envoy. I want to ask, as someone who's volunteer fiery, someone who rides your bike through the scrub, someone who spends a bit of time out that way, and someone who, as we spoke about, your history and your track record of public service, someone who rolls your sleeves up when the bushfires are happening. Do you think only a coward would get a first-class flight to Hawaii during a black summer bushfire?
Look, you know what it's like when you're in public life. You don't get much time with your family, and I imagine that Jenny had said to Scott, we owe the family a decent holiday. You had your miracle win. This Christmas, please, let's have a decent holiday. And months before the fires happened, it would have all been booked. And I suspect that Scott thought, I really can't let the family down. And so I don't hold it against him at all. If he made one mistake, it was he should have just been upfront that he was going on holidays for a week. Unfortunately for him, it just kind of snuck out.
It was a perfect storm, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it became one of those things that really did him a lot of damage. That said, his poll numbers recovered very strongly for much of the pandemic. I think 12 months back from the 2022 election, he was in a pretty good position. But then a whole lot of other things like this whole weaponised Brittany Higgins stuff hit the government. And I think the basic problem was that after 9 years, they did look like they'd run a bit of puff.
Do you think, what do you think it was in that era? It's not just, what happened to you and then what happened to Turnbull. It happened before that too. Rudd, Gillard, Rudd. Do you think this was just a generation of politicians who got overwhelmed by social media and started responding to a 24-hour news cycle with sugar hits? Did it ever feel like that? Like, you could have had the greatest week, but next week the polls say this and so-and-so says this, and let's act and let's spill.
Yeah, it's a good question, Clancy. Look, I certainly think that the 24/7 news cycle and social media has kind of pressurised our public discourse, polarised and fragmented it, and the outrage industry is got so many opportunities to vent these days. So I think there is an element of that. I also think, to be honest, that politicians by and large have been of lesser calibre and perhaps lesser character in more recent times. I mean, I think back to the Hawke front bench. I mean, apart from Keating, you had people like Peter Walsh, Gareth Evans, John Button, a lot of Willis, Lionel Bowen, very serious, substantial people. And then I think back to the Howard front bench. I mean, we had Costello, of course, who was brilliant, probably the most accomplished Liberal, never to have become Prime Minister. You had, John Fay, Robert Hill, Nick Minchin, a whole lot of Peter Reith, a whole lot of very accomplished people. I think the Rudd-Gillard front benches were much weaker than the Hawke front benches. I think my front bench was much weaker than the Howard front bench. I think by the time Scott was there, the front bench was weaker still.
It was pretty thin.
It was pretty thin, and, without wanting to be critical of any of the individuals who are part of the government now, I don't think even they would say that they were the equivalents of the best of the Hawke era.
Yeah.
So I think we need more people of strong character and proven achievement in our public life. Unfortunately, the mechanisms for getting into Parliament these days, you've often got to wade through a whole factional morass.
Yeah.
Too many people are coming through the staffing ranks because that tends to give them, if you like, an entree, which someone who's out there in the real world doing a real job doesn't have. And so I think we do need to get more people of substance into our public life, and that's on both sides of the fence.
Do you need to pay them more? Because you could make more money. You could make more money putting on a pair of RMs and going to Martin Place.
Completely correct. But in the end, no one should be in public life for the money.
Yeah.
I think that John Howard is a strong contender for our best ever Prime Minister, but I think it was a mistake for him under pressure from the Daily Telegraph and Mark Latham to abolish the parliamentary pension scheme, because the fairly generous pension scheme, which politicians who entered before 2004 got, I think was, if you like, a bit of an incentive to do it, because at least when you left the parliament, if you'd lasted long enough, you were going to get a reasonably good pension.
You didn't have to take a defence contracting job.
You're right. And one of the things that worries me these days is that how many ministers are making decisions with an eye to their post-parliamentary business career. And I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
I mean, the best thing, frankly, is for people to go into Parliament when they've got something behind them, when they've had a bit of a life, say in their 40s, maybe even their 50s, do their 10, 20 years, 30 years, whatever in the Parliament, and then retire to something dignified. So that was what it used to be, and I think there's something to be said for it.
I think we've got time for two more questions. This one, I was just wondering if you had seen the 2004 film with Ashton Kutcher called The Butterfly Effect. Or
was that the idea that the beating of a butterfly's wings could cause a hurricane?
Where like it kind of harks back to what Angus Taylor did his doctorate studies in, more like, your chaos theories, stuff like that. Okay. But what I'm getting at is that back when you were, rudely and unjustly turfed out of the lodge, well, actually out of the AFP,
the Australian Federal Police College.
Had you chosen to retire, do you think we would have got to a point where we got to basically Peter Dutton was, got to the point where he led the Liberals to an annihilation? Do you think if you'd gone and, essentially become, Abbott hockey and partners just down the road, would we have gotten to the point where Dutton led the Liberals to such a wipeout?
Well, I think there's an explanation for why we were in a strong position at Christmas time, but then turned out to cop a real thrashing at the actual election. And I don't think it's really got to do with much that happened in my time. I think the problem was that Peter put party unity ahead of policy strength, and even some of the things that we could and should have run on strongly, for some reason we didn't. I mean, I think we had a good policy for nuclear power to play a much bigger part, or to play a part in our system. I think that we really should have campaigned hard against Labor's unrealised capital gains tax. I think we should have made much more of the fact that living standards had dropped by about 8% over the 3 years. I think the fact that we'd had well over 1 million migrants, record migrants, at a time when the economy was under pressure, I think we should have been campaigning strongly against that. Now, in Peter's defence, I think the pollsters were telling him that he was doing well and he shouldn't rock the boat. As it happened, the pollsters were disastrously wrong, and Peter missed his chance to be Prime Minister, and our country missed the chance to have what I think would have been a much better government than the one we've got.
Here's a question. I know you write about the referendum. I know your position. You were in the no camp, and I know you're mates with Warren and all of that. But here's a question, and I've spoken to Liberals about this. Do you think maybe they should have saved their powder for the federal election? Like that no campaign, it absorbed the entire Liberal Party infrastructure for the best part of a year.
Don't think that's right, Clancy. I mean, the official Liberal Party stayed aloof from that. Yes, different Liberal individuals got very heavily involved, but the party itself was not heavily committed at all, partly because some of the state leaders were pro the voice. So no, and in any event, I mean, if we can't pick out, we can't, as it were, choose our fight. Sometimes the fight chooses us, and if the fight comes, you've just got to have it. And I thought the voice was a gravely flawed proposition. First glance, it seemed okay. Let's be gracious and nice to Aboriginal people. Let's be more inclusive. Not that we're not inclusive, but when you looked at it, it was divisive. It was going to make government even less efficient. It was going to entrench race in our system. So I think it was really important that we fought hard against it. I think the problem was not that we fought and won that battle. I think the problem was that we decided that Labor was badly wounded and we became a little complacent.
Yeah, I mean, there was like a we won moment afterwards that they didn't get to have 18 months later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that no won or yes lost?
A bit of both. I think the yes people in the end let themselves down, particularly when they started making accusations of racism and what have you against no voters. But people like Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, I mean, Jacinta's presentation at the National Press Club a few weeks before the actual vote was I mean, it was a remarkably strong and powerful performance from someone who is a very proud Australian, a very proud Walpiri person, and is comfortable with both her Aboriginal and her Anglo-Irish heritage. And I think as Australians, we've got to be at peace with ourselves. And the problem with the whole voice thing was that it was going to institutionalise division.
Now that we've got you here, and I think this would be an interesting question for you, or it'd be interesting. I'm interested to hear your answer on this. Let's just imagine, for whatever reason, Susan Ley and Ted O'Brien decide tomorrow that they're going to resign. Mm-hmm. Let's not talk about spills. Let's just talk about, all right, they're leaving. Mm-hmm. Who do you think of the current talent in the Liberal Party should be leader and deputy?
Well, what I think is irrelevant. What would matter would be what the party room thought. So, Clancy, if you don't mind, I would leave that matter to the party room. Personally, I've got a lot of respect for Angus Taylor. I've got a lot of respect for
wore this hat.
I've got a lot of respect for Andrew Hastie. But look, in the end, it's a matter for the party room.
Do they feel there were obviously factions in your time? There were factions within the party. Liberals are a broad church, but it felt like there were factions, even though people kept changing sides a lot. Does it feel like that's gotten better, or do you feel like that's gotten worse?
There have been, I regret to say, factions inside the Liberal Party. I regret that very much. I mean, personally, I am on the more conservative end of the Liberal Party spectrum, and people are entitled to a, if you like, an instinctual or a philosophical position. Where I think factions are very destructive is when decisions are made not on the basis of the merits of the argument or the merits of the individual, but on the basis of what the factional warlord says or whether someone is in our faction or the other faction. And I think there's always been too much of that inside the Labor Party.
Yeah.
And I think now there's too much of that inside the Liberal Party. The cure for factionalism, I believe, is just to have a much larger and more broadly based party membership. And so if I may actually offer this thought to your listeners, gentlemen, I would implore people who normally vote Liberal and who are interested in public life and have opinions on politics, please join the Liberal Party. Mm-hmm. I don't say it's going to be the best experience you ever have, but it would be an exercise in civic duty. And if we want better parties and if we want better politicians, we need to have more people, more good people in the parties having their say and making a difference.
Well, with that, Tony Abbott, we thank you for your time. I look forward to getting stuck into the book, Australia, A History by Tony Abbott. As we said before, it's not so much about the politics we've been discussing here. It's about Australia and the history of Australia. And I look forward to getting stuck in.
Good on you. Thanks, gents.